We are very glad that you're all here tonight. We have a wonderful quartet of storytellers, myself being the fifth cog in the wheel, Ingrid Nixon and Jeff Doyle, who created TBD Storytellers. And we also have Anne Rutherford and Antonio Hosha. And we've planned for about an hour. And then at the end, we're going to have an optional hangout session. So you don't have to leave if you don't want to. You can hang out and we can chat for a while. And now for the show. Are you ready? I hope so. The effervescent Anne Rutherford has many types of stories in her teller's bag of tricks, including a knack of stretching the truth. And that's made her 5-time first place winner of the Northwest Folklife Liars Contest. I have that written down because there's no way I was going to remember that. Anne has an alter ego, a doppelganger of sorts, a time-traveling self called Clementine Ryder. And either Anne or Clementine has received a Storytelling World Award for Miss Ryder's stories. Tonight, Miss Ryder is debuting a brand new adventure, going back in time. Please welcome our secret 9th member, Clementine Ryder.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simons. It's wonderful to be coming to you all across the ether of the interweb. My associate, old one-eyed Bob, was making his way across the Great Plain region of our nation. He was going from Omaha to Denver, Colorado. It was early in Bob's career, and he was on a mission for Margaret E. Knight, the flat-bottom paper bag queen. That term does not refer to Ms. Knight's own posterior, but rather to the bottom of the sack that she manufactured and sold. Ms. Knight had invented and patented a machine that would cut, fold, and glue paper sacks into the level, open containers that are still in use today. Rivalry was fierce in this newfangled business of disposable receptacles. So Ms. Knight was keen to get her brand of Eastern paper bags to the western part of the country. And she and old one-eyed Bob had an association of long standing, so he agreed to carry her paper bags through the Great Plains region of our country. But when Bob set forth on his pinto pony Pepita, even though he was going into a part of the world where the weather was perilous, whipsawing between temperature extremes every season of the year, he packed minimal supplies, minimal personal belongings. He wanted to leave every inch of his saddlebags available for the crisply folded flat-bottom paper bags that rustled next to each other row upon row like a sharply creased army. Bob and Pepita set off. They rode week after weary and week, stopping at each town and settlement along the serpentine course of the Platte River, showing merchants there samples of Miss Knight's bags and taking orders for more. Finally, they were within a day's journey of Denver, Colorado, the end of Bob's journey, and where he was to meet Ms. Knight for dinner at Larimer Square the following evening. That day was pure gold sunshine, and Bob became aware of his own aroma, which he described as 1 part onion juice, 2 parts skunk cabbage, and a chaser of Limburger cheese. He'd been on the trail for a long time. He decided that to bathe was the better part of valor, so as not to assault Miss Knight's nostrils the following evening. He found a secluded place by the river and took his spare set of clothes from his saddlebags, let Pepita loose to graze. Then he stripped off his odoriferous garments from bolo tie down to sweaty socks, took a deep breath out there in the altogether, and jumped into the river. Woo! It was cold. Bob said his hair stood on end in places he didn't even know he was furry. But soon as he thawed out enough that he could feel his extremities, he grabbed a handful of river pebbles and started scrubbing himself clean. Oh, he felt like a new man. Floated on his back, hummed a few bars of Handel's water music. Life was good. Then the Great Plains weather did one of its quicksilver changes. There was a flash of lightning, a clap of thunder, the clouds roiled in, and a deluge broke loose from the heavens, swelling that river up to a flash flood. Pepita nickered from the bank, as if to say, Torriente, Torriente! But indeed, Bob was already being carried along by the current. Now, Bob is a strong swimmer, but this was not a matter of swimming, ladies and gentlemen. This was a matter of surviving. He was doing his best to not be dashed to pieces as he was hurled along by the logs and rocks. He went down once. He went down twice. Just as he was to go down for a third time, he arched his back up and took a great gulp of air. And then, hey presto, the Great Plains weather changed again. Air temperature dropped. That river froze solid. Bob was stuck in a sheet of ice like a fly in amber. Well, fortunately, his nostrils were above the ice level, and he calmed himself in his predicament by practicing the technique of alternate nostril breathing that he had learned during his time in the Far East. Feeling of great peace and tranquility enveloped him. And then it occurred to him, this was not the product of yogic practice. This was a harbinger of hypothermia. Old Bob was about to freeze to death when the fickle nature of the Great Plains weather once again came to his rescue. The sun broke through the clouds, melted the ice, he swam his way to shore, and then he had a 2-mile walk back in the blazing sun to where he had left Pepita. By the time he reached the horse, all he had to show for that entire experience was one heck of a sunburn. He found that Pepita had taken refuge on higher ground, but Bob was dismayed to discover the river had washed away his clothes, both the clean as well as the dirty. There he stood in the great outdoors, barefoot all over. Oh, what to do, what to do? He'd passed through the little town of Hughes Station just a few miles ago, but that town was settled by German immigrants that had high moral standards and looked askance on public nudity. How would he get into town to the haberdasher there without being arrested for indecent exposure? He was pondering this dilemma when Pepita nickered, as if to say, Desnudo, desnudo. As he did, the bags in his saddlebags rustled. Bob's eye lit up with an idea. During his time in the gold rush, he spent a lot of time in San Francisco, especially in Chinatown, where he learned the ancient art of Chinese paper folding, ziza. Well, Bob took the few remaining flat-bottom paper bags he had and with them folded an intricate outfit, a pair of brown paper trousers with a crease sharp enough to draw blood. Then he fashioned a brown paper shirt, topped it with a brown paper vest, made himself a brown paper hat with a brown paper bandana wound around the crown. He took his inspiration from the sartorial excellence of the Finnish tailor, Ingvar Nixon, whose establishment in San Francisco Bob frequented whenever he had the funds. Then, arrayed in this brown paper finery, he swung himself atop Pepita. Carefully. I was worried about Bob with that image in my mind. I was worried about how he would settle himself beside that saddle horn, and that's why I got a bit distracted. But he was fine. There were no paper cuts in his delicate regions. And then Bob made his way back to Hughes Station. When he got there, he found it was market day, and the whole town was bustling. He tethered Pepita and strode down the board sidewalk toward the haberdasher. He was a sight to behold and to hear, Those who did not see him heard him go by. A great crowd gathered to marvel at his brown paper ensemble. He strode by the post office with its notice board of wanted criminals, horse thieves, cattle rustlers, bank robbers, various ne'er-do-wells. And just as Bob was about to turn into the doorway of the haberdasher, he heard, "Hold on there, partner." Bob spun around. Pushing through the crowd was the sheriff, tin star ablazing and eyes afire with moral rectitude. "Stop right there, you. You're under arrest." "What are you arresting him for, Sheriff?" said the haberdasher, reluctant to lose such a sale. "Why, he's decently, if unconventionally dressed. I mean, he has a pair of brown paper trousers on and a brown paper vest over his brown paper shirt. Why, he's even got a brown paper bandana wound round the crown of his brown paper hat. What's the charge?" The sheriff drew himself up. "Rustling." That was the only night that Bob ever spent in the hoosgow. The next morning, Miss Knight dispatched a lawyer to secure his release, which he did easily because, as Bob himself would tell you, the charge against him was paper thin. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to all who are gathered. I see I have a little bit of time on the clock, so I'm going to give you a great American classic to end my story time with you. In 1888, Bob was in San Francisco, and he made the acquaintance of Ernest Lawrence Thayer, who was a humorist for the San Francisco Herald, the paper of the day. And one night, he and Bob went out on the town with their colleague, Bulldog Brecky, who's the shortstop for the San Francisco Pioneers that year and led them to victory on many occasions. And after that night of revelry, Mr. Ernest came back and put pen to paper, and he penned an American classic published on June 3rd, 1888 that is still with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Casey at the bat. It looked extremely rocky for the Mudville Nine that day. The score stood 2-4 with but one inning left to play. So when Cooney died at second, and Burroughs did the same, a pallor wreathed the faces of the patrons of the game. A staggering few got up to go, leaving there the rest with that hope that springs eternal within the human breast. For they thought, if only Casey could get a whack at that. For they'd put even money down with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, and likewise so did Blake. And the former was a puddin', and the latter was a fake. So on that stricken multitude a death-like silence sat, where there seemed but little chance of Casey getting to the bat. Then Flynn let drive a single, to the wonderment of all, and the much despised Blakey tore the cutter off the ball. And when the dust had settled and they saw what had occurred, there was Blakey, safe at second, and Flynn a hugging third. Then from the gladdened multitude went up a joyous yell. It struck upon the mountaintop, it rattled on the dell, it fell upon the hillside and resounded on the flat. For Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's bearing as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing and a smile on Casey's face. And when, responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his cap, no stranger in the town could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded as he wiped them on his shirt. And when the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance gleamed from Casey's eyes, a sneer curled Casey's lip. And when the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, Casey stood a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman, the ball unheeded sped. "That ain't my style," said Casey. "Strike one," the umpire said. From the benches, dark with people, there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. "Kill him! Kill the umpire!" cried someone in the stand, and it's likely they'd have done so had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult, he made the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the spheroid flew. Casey again ignored it. And the umpire cried, "Strike two!" "Fraud!" cried the maddened thousands, and the echo answered, "Fraud, da, 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 da." But one single look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain. They knew that Casey would not let the ball go by again. The smile is gone from Casey's mouth. His lips are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel vengeance his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go. And now the air is shattered with the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. A band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. Somewhere men are laughing, somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Clementine Ryder, and it has been my very great pleasure to spend this time with you. Thank you.
Woo-hoo. Yay, that was excellent. That was excellent. I have to say that with all this COVID going on, and the fact that us storytellers usually get up and walk around and travel around places, my bottom is actually feeling like a flattened paper bag. Yes, it really is. And on some days it feels like there have been cans that have had juice left in them a little too long, if you know what I'm saying.
Totally do.
So give it out one more time for Anne Rutherford. So our second storyteller tonight. Oh, hang on. So what have you got coming up in the virtual world, Anne?
Well, we're going to be, of course, doing more of these kind of shows. And Norm and I have just finished recording 104 little story jokes on YouTube. So if you want to laugh, you can go on our YouTube channel. I'll put it up in the chat. We have 2 books of story jokes. We decided everybody needs a laugh right now. So that's part of what we've been doing. So you can go visit those. And then I'm going to get back to work on a book because I'm trying to get Clementine's Adventures down in book form. I'm working with a great young graphic artist. Yeah, and then I'm also working, and I think there's somebody here in the audience who I'm going to be working with grandparents who want to connect with their grandkids by telling stories online. So I'm going to be doing some of that kind of coaching, which feels really wonderful.
Nice. That sounds excellent.
Yeah.
Well, our second story tonight, second storyteller tonight, is my blue ape and a good friend of mine called Jeff Doyle. That's his. Oh, I'm not going to say what it is. That should be a little secret. I have appeared and seen Jeff over the years, and I've always loved what he does. He always grabs his listeners and drags them along on his adventure, one way or another, by hook or by crook. He's an incredibly kind man and a great builder of buildings. He's actually one of the people that built TBD Storytellers, and for that I have to greatly thank him. He is able to make the most sad person, I believe, laugh with the stories that he tells. He has a vivid imagination, a phenomenal imagination. And today he's going to share a bit of family lore. Please welcome, really, the one and only Jeff Doyle.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you all for coming. You know, I was talking to my friend Morgan the other day, and she told me that her parents never drank alcohol or smoked cigarettes or swore. And I thought, wow, we grew up in a completely different environment, almost like a different planet. I mean, in my family was... You know, we were gifted in my family because we could do all those things at once. We were great multitaskers. I remember I remember going to my grandmother Doyle's house, and all of us 17 grandchildren would be running around the house in the yard. But there at that kitchen table would be all of the adults, my mom and dad, my my Uncle Jack and Aunt Kathy, Aunt Elizabeth and Uncle Bud. There was Mary Ellen and John Ray and Rhea and my Aunt Barb. And then there was Father Decker, because every good German, Irish, Catholic family had to have a priest in the family. And there would be my grandmother sitting at the head of the table. And they would all be smoking. And the smoke would be so thick that you could hardly see through the haze to the wall behind them. And then they would be drinking a little bit of Stroh's beer, which was brewed in Detroit, and a little Irish whiskey, and they would be telling stories. You know, they would tell the story about the time my grandfather went to the funeral of one of his associates. He was a good Irishman, and, you know, he cried at the funeral. He gave his condolences to the widow. And, you know, he came home and he told my grandmother, he says, well, you know, everybody said he looked great, but I don't know. I thought he looked kind of awful. well, only to find out 3 days later that, well, into his hardware store walked the dead man. My grandfather had gone to the wrong funeral. And then my dad would tell the story about the time my grandpa took him and his best friend Fitz. They were about 10 years old, and he took him out to Langsburg, which was where the old family farm was. And he took him into town to the pickle factory, and somehow they had gotten in there and they had climbed up to the top of the brine tank and peed inside.
Oh.
So, I mean, I hate to say it, but, you know, if your family brought pickles from the Langsburg Pickle Factory in the 1940s, my family owes you a really big apology. That kitchen table applied also at our house. Every day my dad would come home from work, and he and my mom would sit there, and they would smoke a cigarette and have a drink. That kitchen table where we shared meals, we told about our days, where we played family games, and where we made family decisions. One of the best decisions we ever made there, my dad ever made there, was to join the YMCA, Y Indian Guides. It's an organization that still exists today. It's now called the Y Guides. The Y Guides started in the 1920s when some of the executives from the YMCA were on a hunting trip, and they had a Native American guide. And he pointed out to him one night at the campfire, he said, you know, in a typical American household, it is the mother who raises the sons. But in the Native American culture, it is the father's job to raise the son. And thus was born the idea for the Y Guides. It was to foster the relationship between father and son. It was unique in the fact that the father could not participate unless his sons participated, and the sons could not participate unless the dad participated. Well, we had been invited to join the Tecumseh tribe, and my brother Bob and I were excited to join because we knew that it meant that we would get to spend some more time with our dad. My dad thought it was a good idea. His only reservation was there was no beer drinking allowed at Indian Guide or Y Guide campouts or meetings. A typical, you know, Y Guide meeting would be we would go to a member's house, we would do a craft, and then we would have a snack, and then we would plan the next camping trip. Each meeting would end with the Y Guide pledge, and then all the fathers would say, "Pails forever, son," and all the boys would say, "Pails forever, Dad." My dad had never camped or canoed in his life. And the first trip that we were planning was a canoeing and camping trip on the Big Manistee River in northern Michigan. And like I say, he had never camped or canoed in his life, but he went at it with gusto. He bought some sleeping bags, and he bought a new camp stove, and he borrowed a tent from a friend. We arrived at the campground about 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, and we set up the 3-man canvas pup tent. Now, I don't know who named the 3-man canvas pup tent, but whoever he was or they were a liar, because there is no way you could fit 3 men in that tent. Just barely room for 2 little boys and their dad. Well, the next thing he did was he got out his brand new stove. He unfolded it. It was a Sterno stove. He was so proud of it. And that thing was super efficient. It could heat a can of Denny Moore's beef stew in 2.5 hours flat. My brother and I kept saying, Dad, is it time for dinner? Dad, is it time for dinner? And then we started wandering through the campground asking other Y guy dads if we could eat with them. And well, finally we ate cold Denny Moore's. That night we sat around the campfire for a little bit, but then it started to rain, and well, all the boys went to bed, and the fathers, they got prepared for the next day. And well, my brother Bob and I got in the tent, and the first thing he said was, well, whatever you do, don't touch the canvas or it'll leak. Oh, no, come on. I'm a born skeptic. No way. So I reached over right over his bunk, and I touched the roof of that tent. And sure enough, water started dripping in onto the sleeping bag. When my dad came in, I said, Dad, whatever you do, don't touch the tent, it'll leak. And he says, yeah, that's what I told your brother. Good to know. Good to know. Well, apparently, someone had touched that tent all over because it rained hard that night, and that thing leaked like a sieve. Little boys can sleep through those kind of things, but Dad's not so much. And he didn't get much sleep. Thank goodness that someone had pity on him in the morning and handed him a hot cup of black coffee. Well, we got in the car and we headed on down to the canoe livery where we were outfitted in our orange life jackets. My brother, Bob, older brother, got to sit in the front of the canoe. I got in the middle, and my dad got in the back. And then we started to practice what my dad later liked to call high finance canoeing. We were going bank to bank. All the way down that river. And we were falling woefully behind. By the time we got to that lunch spot, all the other Y guides were pulling out of the lunch spot. So we pulled in and had our lunch. And after lunch, we got back on the river, and Bob and I were like, Dad, we got to hurry. Come on, Dad, we're way behind. And then we came to a fork in the river, and my dad decided to take the stream less traveled, let's say. He was convinced that little stream went straight back to our campground, and we canoed in with vigor, and it really was more the land of stumps. And we canoed farther and farther, and he was committed farther and farther, and pretty soon there were stumps in front of us, and we came to a stop, and there were stumps beside us, and you couldn't go sideways, and I think a couple of stumps grew up behind us. and that's when my brother and I started. Dad, it's kind of hot. Dad, I'm thirsty. Dad, I need some suntan lotion. Dad, we're way behind. Dad, do you know what you're doing? Dad, I gotta pee. Fatherhood will break a man.
Amen.
And as my father wrestled with that paddle, trying to turn that canoe around, he lost it. and he let out a string of expletives that I have never heard before or since. Mother stumper, son of a stump. And I learned a whole new vocabulary. My brother and I sat shyly in the canoe as my dad let loose. And then it is as if someone flipped a switch, and he looked down at us, and it is as if it finally occurred to him the absurdity of the situation, and he started to laugh. And then we started to laugh. And then he got out a cigarette, and he lit that cigarette, and he took his time and he smoked it. And most likely that was one of the most gratifying cigarettes of his life. And when he was done, he flipped it in the water and he said, "Okay, boys, let's get out of here." And he canoed like an expert, backing us up and back out onto the river. And all the way back to the campground, we sang "Row, row, row your boat," and 99 bottles of beer on the wall. Back to the campground. When we got there, the Tecumseh tribe fully inducted us, and they flipped over our canoe in the river and baptized us, and much to the chagrin of my father. That night, we got to play flashlight tag, and we got to sit around the campfire and listen to stories and make s'mores. Later that night, after all the boys had gone to bed, my father liberated the Tecumseh tribe from their non-drinking policy. He changed it to, we could have a couple of beers after all the boys go to bed. My dad later went on to lead our tribe of the Wide Guides. He welcomed the Warners the next year, and we canoed right beside him as they went bank to bank. He would lead us on marches through the woods that we will never forget. To the left, to the left, to the left, right, left. Your hair is white, your pants are tight, your balls are swinging from left to right. Kings count, 1, 2, kings count. And all the boys would break down laughing. This is why you should never leave your sons alone with their fathers. Something changed in my father in that swamp, and I asked him about it later, and he said it was on that trip that he had realized, don't ever miss an opportunity to spend time with your kids. And it was the beginning of a relationship with my brother and me and my sister that lasted through grade school, junior high, high school, college, and into adulthood. And it extended not only to us, but also to our wide group of friends. So much so that when we were in high school and we were in college, our friends didn't want to go to a party. They didn't want to go off to the bar. They wanted to come to our house, to my house, to sit at the kitchen table, to sit with my dad, to drink a couple of beers while he smoked a couple cigarettes and tell stories the way it should be.
Yeah.
Pals forever, Dad.
No. Amen.
That was excellent.
Yeah.
Woo. That was a great story, Jeff. Thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. So, next up, we have the award-winning man from Brazil, the man of movement, the man who moved to Maine, my friend and soon to be yours. is about to take you on to another part of the world, far from the Americas, a place where glasses are cheap and the climate is far from the wilds and the freezing winters of Maine, where he now lives. Please join Antonio Hosha and his love of travel. Oh, Paul, can you take Antonio's photo off and give us a live stream?
Hello, everybody. It's so good to have you here.
Hello, Antonio.
I'm way up in Maine, and I appreciate you coming and making this possible for all of us tonight. Have you been inside for too long lately?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe a little bit of cabin fever? Have you been cooped up for too long? Are you about to go cuckoo?
What are you gonna?
Well, if you're one of those, this is the right show for you, because right now I'm going to be your tour guide. I'm going to take you on a tour to the Far East. And if you're watching this from the Far East, well, make room, because here we come. During this trip, you're not going to just hear about wonderful and exotic sights, but you're also going to witness myself reliving my worst mime performance ever. Ever. So fasten your seatbelts, and here we go. You know, I've been a travel aficionado for a long time. I'm actually a travel junkie. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and I'm a plain nut as well. I love going places, and storytelling has granted me amazing trips. I've traveled across 6 continents, and I'm always investigating, trying to go to a country while I am in a country performing. So many times I'm just kind of looking for opportunities to sneak into another, sneak into a trip and go to another country and see something I've never seen before, all the while participating at an international festival. For example, I'll give you an example. I've been to Singapore a handful of times. For those who know where Singapore is, here is a globe of the world. Singapore is what the pin is right here. That's the pin. The equator goes right by it. It's an island 36 miles long, right next to the Malaysian peninsula. It's actually connected to Malaysia through a bridge. Yeah, so right there, that's what it is. See? The first time I went to Singapore, Ujo was playing nut. I went to Indonesia for 2 weeks after a gig. The second time I went to Singapore, I ended up in Europe for 2 weeks, in Switzerland and Italy, visiting relatives of mine who lived there. And then the third time I went to Singapore, I had a 10-hour connection at Incheon International Airport in South Korea. And 10 hours at an airport? I love airplanes, but that's a little bit too long. So I hopped on a bus and I went downtown Seoul for 5 hours. I had lunch. I went to 2 different temples. I even found time to meditate a little bit. You see, that's the kind of traveler I am. So the last time I was in Singapore, I had a heavy schedule at a festival for a whole week with only 1 day off. And right away, my travel bug started to go through me, and I'm like, I gotta go somewhere. I know Singapore is great. I mean, it's a fantastic country, a fantastic city, but I had been there many times before, so I was kind of looking for that opportunity to see if I could go to another country. Who would leave a festival in the middle of the festival to go to another country for 1 day? How could I do it? Airplanes were going to be too complicated. So I did a little bit of more research, and then I discovered that there was a train service overnight. Yeah, from Singapore all the way to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, the capital city of Malaysia. I'm like, whoa, I've never been to Malaysia. You know, it's funny because it's right next to Singapore, but I had never been there yet. And I'm like, oh, I gotta go to Kuala Lumpur. The train leaves at 10:30 p.m. And all I have to do is be there at the train station. And I was looking for seats to book. And I found, because of the exchange rate, I could afford first class. Now, hear me out. This was not a first class seat. That was a first class cabin, a bunk bed. You had to share with another traveler, but still a bunk bed, air conditioning, and a private bathroom. Yeah, I was like, whoa, this is gonna be exciting. I'll be able to sleep to Kuala Lumpur, have a whole day there to visit the city, and then hop on the train overnight, go back to Singapore, and be fresh to tell stories the next day. The same day, actually. So I was all excited. I finished my day performances. I hopped on a cab and I went to the train station. I got there and I did not know this. I did not know this. Immigration was on this end of the trip. I thought I was going to do immigration in Kuala Lumpur, but I had to be standing on a long line, you know, waiting. And the train was about to leave, and I was one of the last people to get on the train. You know, it was 10:25, 10:30. The train lurched and started to snake itself north on that beautiful peninsula, and I was still plowing through, you know, just walking through the cars, passing people, you know, third class, second class, and then I finally get to the first class car, and I find my cabin, and I open the door, and I saw that the bottom bunk had already been taken. There was a backpack there, a few clothing, items of clothing there. So I claimed the top bunk, and I heard somebody in the bathroom. And the train was going. I had already showered in the hotel. I had already had dinner. So I was ready to go to sleep. I just wanted to brush my teeth, and do a number one, So I just lay there waiting. I just waited for the bathroom to vacate. So I'm just lying there, feeling like I'm in a Paul Thoreau book, one of his books, traveling by train through all the world. And I fell asleep. When all of a sudden I get jolted by the bathroom door opening. And when I look, this tall French brunette comes out of the bathroom. That was my cabin mate, a French brunette. And I went, whoa. And that's when I hit my head on the top of the cabin, because I had been dreaming all along. And I looked, the guy was from France, but no brunette. And oui, no, comme ci, comme ça. I get into the bathroom to do my necessities. And that's when I get, acquainted with the bathroom. There's the toilet. Right next to the toilet, like intimate relationship, is the sink. And right next to the sink, there's the shower stall. I'm like, ooh, that's going to be handy tomorrow night when I get back and I can shower myself. And so I brushed, I did my things, and I jumped on the bed and I fell asleep to wake up at Kuala Lumpur at 6 a.m. Oh, 6 a.m. I got out of that train right into a molasses air of 190, humidity, 120 degrees. Singapore is hot, Kuala Lumpur is hot. And the first place I went was to the Baku Caves, just north of the city. It is one of the most visited Hindu shrines outside of India. This section of 3 caves, and there are steps going up towards the first one with monkeys running up the railings. And I'm like, wow. And I'm like, wow. And I'm like, whoa. And then after visiting this beautiful Hindu shrine, I get on a bus and I go to downtown and I go to a street market for lunch, all kinds of exotic treats to eat. I want to try a little bit of that. I want to try a little bit of this. Oh, the world has so much exciting things to offer. I love it. I love it. And then I went to a museum, and then the afternoon rolled in and out. and I started to wear the city. You know, the car exhaust, you know, sweat was just coming down my bald head, traveling down, you know, cracks I didn't even know I had. And then by 8 o'clock, it was time to go, but the train left at 11 o'clock in the evening. So I'm like, I'm ready to go. I'm tired. My legs were hurting. So I said, oh, that shower in the train. And I don't want to miss that shower. You know, what if I have another cabin companion who's going to, you know, take the bathroom? So I went to the train station and I sat there for an hour and a half before the train departed. I was one of the first ones to get on that train. And I went straight for that cabin. I just wanted to get there. And again, excuse me here and excuse me there, and kids jumping this way and people opening luggage that way, some settling to go to sleep. And then I get to my cabin. I was the first one there, and I shut the cabin. I took my clothes off. I mean, I had to peel it, you know, it was out, it was sticky. I was stinky. I mean, and I get into the bathroom. I negotiate with the toilet. I say, excuse me, to the sink, and then I get inside the shower stall. I mean, the shower stall was so small that when I got inside, I felt like I was wearing it. And the shower head went like this. The shower head is on my head, and I look like RuPaul wearing like a futuristic head. And I'm like trying to move. I'm trying to move this thing, and it's insisting that it's gonna be there. And I'm trying to move down, but you come after me, you hit me on the side, you know. At one point, he tried to choke me, and I started to wonder which country the thing was manufactured. And then I'm moving things around. And then I said, okay, just open and take a shower. Just open the thing and take a shower. The cold water, it doesn't matter if it's cold, if it's hot, just take a shower. There's no water coming down this thing. There's no water coming down. And I move one way, and I move the other way, and I press it, and I pull it. It came off, and I put it back, and I'm trying to fix it. There's no water. There's no water. I have to teach at a university in Singapore all day tomorrow, and I have no water to shower. How am I going to do this? And I started to freak out. Nothing I did with that thing would get water out. So I threw a towel around my waist, and I jumped out of the cabin and into the corridor of the train, you know. And here's this guy, you know, I'm 6'3", and I'm walking around with the towel around. I'm looking for somebody who worked for the train because I got a shower. I've been dreaming of the shower this entire time. And I see this guy in uniform with the train company logo. And I said, the shower in my cabin. And I'm, whoa, holding the towel. The shower in my cabin is not working. The shower is not working. And he's looking at me. And I said, the shower is not working. There's no water. And he's staring at me. And then it dawned upon me that he spoke no English. And he understood no English. So I said, I'm like, I'm a mime. Doing a little bit of charades now. It's not going to be an issue. So I started to go like this and no shower, and I'm doing that, and I'm holding the towel, and I'm doing this. And the man is staring at me, and I'm flunking the easiest thing I know how to do. I'm flunking a mime performance. I can't get him to understand that this is shower, and this is water, and this is the nozzle, and staring at me, and he's staring at me, and I want to take a shower. And knowing that I was failing at flunking, I do the universal follow me sign. And he follows me to my cabin, and he follows me into the cabin, and I don't know to this day how we managed to fit into the bathroom together. But inside that bathroom, and I point to the shower. I try to turn it on, and there's no water coming down. I'm like, you see? And he smiles, the serene smile. He was like a monk, and he went. Trained by Marcel. I've been trained by Tony Montanaro, and this conductor is a better mind than I am. All he needed to do is wait for the train to move, and the water would be turned on. Well, he left the cabin, and all of a sudden, I felt that lurching of the train, and I stepped into that shower stall wearing my futuristic RuPaul hat. And I turned on that water, and the most delicious, cold at first and then hot soon after, that water came down my body, washing away the city grime and leaving behind just the sweet memories of a wonderful day spent in Kuala Lumpur.
Oh, that's great. Oh, Antonio, that's fantastic. Oh, it's wonderful.
Oh, look at this. I forgot. I just noticed something I dropped. Just a second.
Yay!
Just a second.
Does it have a shower head?
Bye, Antonio.
Bye, Antonio.
Oh my gosh, he
Thank
is
you.
so good. Antonio is such a good storyteller, such a good man.
Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you. Oh, Antonio, do you want to tell people about your treehouse thing?
Yes, I am doing a TV-like storytelling series called the Treehouse Storytelling Show, and it's on my YouTube channel. I have 2 episodes there, and it's shot like a TV show. It takes place inside of a treehouse, a real treehouse I built for my daughter, Josephine. And so I host it there, and I do a little intro about the country where the story, or the continent where the story is going to come from, and people can participate afterwards with some geography activity after they listen to the show, because I instruct them on how to do it, and then I tell a story. So you can go to Google and put in Antonio Rocha Storyteller channel, and you're gonna get to YouTube. Go to YouTube, not Google first. Anyway, and I have a show coming up Saturday the 11th through the Michigan Guild in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'll be doing a performance in the evening, an hour solo, and so that's coming up Saturday the 11th. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight.
It's great having you here.
Thank you so much.
It's phenomenal having you here. And I'd like to remind the storytellers to write their websites and their names in the chat section. So if people want to look you up, then the information is there.
Yeah.
So that was an amazing story. Mm-hmm. And what I want us to do now is just to take a big, deep breath and look back at what we've seen so far. We began with Anne Rutherford and the mischievous Clementine Ryder with her flat-bottomed bags. And then we had Jeff and his father, and his father's moment, his Gestalt moment, when he realized that, every moment spent with your children is a sacred moment. My words, not his. And then we got into the shower with Antonio. But we have one more storyteller, one more tale before you are allowed to leave. Ingrid Nixon, co-founder of TBD, first discovered the love, the draw, and the power of storytelling in Port Angeles in Washington State. She immediately ran off to get a master's degree, because she's that kind of person, at the Storytelling the East Tennessee State University. She is a ranger and is packing a full flask of water. And won, not that long ago, Girl of the Year at Roosevelt Junior High, 1978. Please welcome the polar cap carving inducing ranger storyteller, all out smarty pants, Ingrid Nixon.
Well, I am honored to be here tonight. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you for that introduction, Simon. I never miss that opportunity to talk about being Girl of the Year. Thing to it. So here we are. I am sitting on the beach in Southeast Alaska. It is late September, and it is dark. And I'm sitting in a national park. I am many, many miles away from the nearest city, the nearest streetlights. And so the darkness that's around me is primordial. And when I look up in the night sky from horizon to horizon, I see stars. And it is as if each star in the sky is trying to out-twinkle its neighbor. They're just like, look at me. But on this particular night, I am not there to see stars. No, I am sitting, watching, and waiting. But then, there it is, on the northern horizon. It is low in the sky. It is a green spear of light. And I watch as this green spear of light grows. And this green is a fluorescent green. And I watch as this green spear of light just grows and changes. And suddenly it is a band across the night sky above my head. And as I watch, this band continues to change, and suddenly it is a sheet of light, like a curtain, hanging down in the night sky above my head. And then, as if blown by this cosmic breeze, this sheet of light begins to ripple. And as I watch the northern lights above my head in the sky, the spectacle is such that I begin to chuckle. And I think of the people who looked at the northern lights before we had any idea of the science, and what they must have thought, the stories they made up. You know, for some people, the northern lights were caused by a cosmic fox that ran through the heavens with lights shooting off its tail. For some, it's the reflection of light off the shield of women warriors who are going off into battle. For others, it's caused by spirits that are playing a game in the heavens. They are kicking around a ball that is made by a walrus's head. And I've just got to agree that whatever they thought was causing the lights, it does indeed seem to be the stuff of gods. But as I watch this curtain of light, it suddenly shifts and it becomes two curtains of light. And the lower edge of it has this bright pink glow. And these curtains are dancing together in unison. And as I watch that, now I know the science. I know what the scientists say. The scientists say that the cause of the lights is actually, it starts way, way far away from Earth. And that these lights, even though they feel so close to me, they actually are occurring about 30 miles up in the atmosphere, that place where our atmosphere is just giving way to space. And I know the scientists say that there are two places on the planet, in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, where the lights are most consistent. It's that place where the magnetic field begins to turn back towards Earth. And both of those locations are known as the aurora oval. And I know that the scientists say that the northern lights occur 365 days a year. It's just that sometimes they're stronger than others, and you have to have darkness in order to see them. Now, it is well known in Alaska that the people who see the northern lights most consistently are the people who do not yet have indoor plumbing. There has got to be some sort of perk to go to the house in the middle of a winter's night. But for the rest of us, there's the app. You know, the scientists can predict when the lights are going to be strong. And so on that night, as I am watching the lights, I know that in the days that follow, the lights are going to be quiet. But then at the end of the week, on Friday, the lights are going to be very strong again. In fact, they are going to extend down from that aurora oval, down through Alaska, down through Canada, down into the lower 48 as far as Southern Oregon. Well, 2 days later, I am on a cruise ship that has come to this national park. I'm on board as a ranger. This is how most of our people visit. And normally we have seasonal rangers who go out on these ships, but it's late September, so all of our seasonal rangers are gone. So it's left to those of us who run the program to go on board. And this ship that we've gone on board, it has over 4,000 passengers and almost as many crew. So on board this ship, there are 8,000 people. It's like going into a small city, a city that is bigger than any community I have lived in since I graduated from college many years ago. But when we go on board, my job as the ranger on this day is to set up this information desk, and then I wander around and I just talk with people, and I point things out the window, and I answer their questions, and I help them see wildlife, and I help them discover the wonders of this wild place. And this is why I got into the ranger business. Well, the highlight of any trip into the bay is the time that we spend in front of a tidewater glacier. And so when we get up to the glacier, the captain turns the ship broadside, and we tell everybody, get your hat, get your coat, get your gloves, get your camera, your binoculars, get outside and look at this ice. So there we are, we're out on deck. We are lining that one side of the ship, and we are looking at this river of ice that's flowing out of the mountains, these high snow-capped peaks. And as I'm standing there, people are asking me questions, and they're looking at the ice. And the woman standing next to me, this young woman, she finally goes, so this ice is supposed to be moving, right? And so I explained yet again the dynamics of how a glacier forms and moves, how generations of snowflakes have fallen high in those mountains, and that how over time those snowflakes, the sheer weight of those snowflakes, they compress into ice. And then soon the weight of that ice is such that they are pulled by gravity down the hill. And as the case with a tidewater glacier, that ice just flows out onto the mountains and down to the sea, where eventually it breaks off and falls in the ocean. Well, as I'm standing there, this couple comes up to me. And this woman says, Ranger, tell my husband the word for when a chunk of ice drops off and falls into the sea. So I turn to the man and I say, calving. And I see her elbow him. She just goes, see? And I'm suddenly concerned that my answer is contributing to marital discord. But the man, he's with good humor, and he steps up and he's like, calving? Why calving? And I explained that it does seem as though the early scientists that were studying glaciers, that they reminded them of cows. That a cow would drop a calf, it would give birth to the calf. And so they thought that when a glacier dropped an iceberg, it gave birth to the iceberg. So they used the word calving. So the man says, okay. And he turns and looks at the glacier and he says to me, so make it calve. And I kind of laugh. And he says, no, I mean, can't you get the captain to blow the ship's horn or something? And if the puny sound vibrations caused by a ship's horn, even a ship this big, would be enough to get that glacier to calve. So I tell him, no, you must wait and be patient. Well, soon enough, there is a great crack. And this chunk of ice, the size of a 10-story building, breaks off the face of that glacier and just plunges into the ocean. And everyone around me cheers. And soon after that, you can feel the captain begin to turn the ship around. So everybody leaves the railing and goes over to the other side of the ship. And that is when this woman approaches me. She looks at that ice in the water. She looks at me and she goes, "How am I supposed to feel about that?" Well, this is a question to which I do not know the answer. So I ask her, "Well, how does it make you feel?" And she says, "Well, it makes everybody else feel really happy, but I just feel lost. Hey, look, I know what's going on in this planet. Can you tell me, is there enough snow falling in those mountains to keep this glacier alive? I mean, is this glacier going to be alive in 100 years?" Another tough question. So I answer her the best I can. And I say, the answer to that question rests with you and me and everyone here and the choices that we make today.
Wow.
And I really do hope that we choose well so that, yeah, this glacier will be around in 100 years. And then that woman, she turns away from me. She looks at the glacier and she just goes, "God, I wish my mom was here. My mom was supposed to be on this trip, but she died this spring. And so now I'm here with my brother and my mom would love this." And I look at that chunk of ice in the water and at that glacier and those mountains and the vastness of this landscape. And I say to her, I think she would. Now, for many people who come to the park, that time in front of the Tidewater Glacier, when we're done with that, that is the end of their visit. And so it could be the end of my story. But there was actually more in store for me that day. And so when I finally said goodbye to that woman and I was walking away, I was making my way back into that information desk. And as I was walking along, suddenly I could not take 5 steps without everyone wanting to get their picture taken with the ranger. So it was like, pose for a photo, 5 steps, pose for another photo. But there were 2 pictures taken that day that I remember. And one was this little boy ran up to me. This little boy, on his chest was this big silver badge. And he says, "Hey, I'm a junior ranger. I'm the same as you." And I kneel down, I look at him, and I realize he did a lot of work to earn that badge. And so I say, "Hey, thank you for all that work you put into that. Now seeing you with that badge on your chest, I know the future of this park is in great hands." And his parents, his proud parents, ask us to pose for a photo. And I put my arm around him and I gladly pose. But then I walk inside and I'm walking through the lounge. I'm making my way up toward that information desk. And I suddenly realized that I don't want to go to that desk. I don't want to go to that desk because I'm just going to have to pack it up. And then that means that this day is over and I don't want this day to end. And so I just randomly turn and I walk into a section of the lounge. And in this section of the lounge, there are 6 people. So out of 8,000 people on board this vessel, there are 6 people in this little section. There's a man and a woman. There are 2 elderly women who are sitting near the window. And off on my right, there are 2 women. And when they look at me, I see that they have the same face, separated by a generation. So it's a mother traveling with her grown-up daughter. Well, the minute I walk into this section of the lounge, all of a sudden someone's like, "The ranger's here." And we start hanging off each other. And we're talking about highlights of the day and highlights of their trip. And I'm asking them, they're answering their questions. And then the elderly woman, one of them sitting by the window, she holds up a notebook and a pen. And she says, "I'm keeping a journal. Ranger, what's your name?" I say, "Ingrid." Well, then the man says, "Ingrid, do we have any chance of seeing the Northern Lights on this trip?" I say, "Well, where are you going to be on Friday?" His wife answers, "They're going to be in Victoria, British Columbia. And then when they sail from Victoria, they're going to sail that night to Seattle." So I say, "Well, I happen to know that on Friday night, the lights are supposed to be very strong. So when it gets dark, just go out on deck and look to the north." Well, one of the elderly women says, "Which side of the ship is north?" And I say, well, I happen to know it's going to be on the left side of the ship, the port side, because I grew up in that area. I grew up in a little town across from Victoria, a town called Port Angeles. Well, that's when the mother says to me, I live in Port Angeles. Really? So we exchange addresses, and she tells me where her family house is. I tell her where my family house is, where my mom lived until just a little while ago. And then one of the elderly women at the window says, well, Ingrid, what's your last name? And I say, Nixon. And that's when the mother says, you're not part of the Nixon family, are you? Now, I have been asked that question many times in my life, but it usually has to do with But in this case, there is only one Nixon family in Port Angeles, so I say yes. And she says, I worked with your father. She comes over and introduces herself to me, this mother, and she describes how in 1974, when she was a young surgical nurse, she was brand new at the hospital. Her first night working in the emergency room, the doctor on call was my father. Oh. And she says, our first customer was a stab victim. Your dad, he talked me through it. We sewed that guy up and he lived. And then she proceeded to tell me, in the many days that followed, there were many times where she stood near my father in the operating room. And as my father said, scalpel, she handed him the scalpel. Clamp, clamp, sponge, sponge. And so it was until 1978, when my father died in a plane crash. Well, now her daughter says, what happened? And I watch as this retired surgical nurse tells her daughter everything about my father's accident. And then she talks about what it was like to work with him. And finally, she turns to me and she says, your father was such a nice man. Well, now I want my picture taken with her. And so we pose for the photo. And after that, we marvel at the fact that we made this connection, the randomness of it, of the fact that I normally don't go on those ships, that of 8,000 people, we ran into each other, let alone we had this conversation. And so when I eventually say goodbye, I walk away and I just have this glow in my heart. And this glow persists for days. And then it finally dawns on me that the reason why we had this conversation, the reason why we made this connection was that question about the Northern Lights. Mm. And I think how perfect, because you see, the Northern Lights begin when there is an explosion on the surface of the sun. No. And with that explosion, charged particles are thrown into space. And those charged particles, they travel at incredible speed on the solar wind. And as they get close to Earth, they collide with particles in our own atmosphere. And with each one of those collisions, each one of those connections, energy is released. And it is the sum of all that energy that forms the aurora oval that circles the Earth like a halo and gives out a most extraordinary light.
Mm.
Oh,
Wow.
Extraordinary. Oh,
That's such a good story.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you, Ingrid, so much for sharing that. Wasn't that incredible, folks? Isn't that an amazing story?
wow.
So let's give it up once more for Ingrid Nixon. I know that we can't hear you.
All right.
But wave your hands. And also, please, thanks our other storytellers, Anne Rutherford, Jeff Doyle, Antonio Hosha, and Ingrid. We'll be doing another event on the last Tuesday of July, the 28th of July, which will feature Norm Breck, Paul Strickland, Sheila Arnold, and myself, Simon Brooks. Remember, if you want to stick around for a quick chat, then please do so. We're up for that. And again, thank you so much indeed for joining us, and thanks for supporting us. And thanks for being here. And we
Yes.
hope to see you again soon.
Thank you all. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Have a great
Huzzah.
Around to let 'em know